Hi guys! There's a lot of best practices to remember when you're breeding pals in Palworld. So today I'm going to run through 20 essential breeding tips I think everyone should know to make their breeding more efficient, more fast. We'll be talking about best base locations, best passives, where to find the passives, where to get all the ingredients that you need, the best food for your base, spoil timers, breeding pens, the whole shebang. We'll cover it all. If you like this kind of content and you want to see more Palworld videos from me on similar topics in the future, drop me a comment requesting what the next video topic should be and drop a like and we'll get started. First tip. When you're trying to choose the best possible base location, especially if it's one for breeding purposes, you obviously want a good climate for egg incubation and stuff like that, but it's also nice to have things like nearby resources and being in close proximity to traders. And it's not super easy to find all of this stuff in one place, but I think this is one of the best breeding farm base locations in the entire game. So let's quickly check it off against the previous criteria, right? If you want to do some dungeon farming, there's a dungeon right here against the base. If you need rare pals for breeding, take a little step outside the base, and on this ledge, you'll find a black marketeer with a bunch of rare pals. And, maybe most importantly, in this location, both scorching and ice eggs can incubate comfortably with a single fire or cooler. So it's a perfect storm of different things in close proximity to you, and the coordinates for the base are 150, 150, located towards the northern part of the map. Now, as a bonus tip I mentioned in my general tips and tricks video for Palworld, which is linked in the description and on screen now, you can also turn incubation time down to 0 in your server settings to instantly hatch your eggs. Next tip is to organize inside your base smartly, because you basically want to prevent any opportunity for pals to end up in weird places they shouldn't be or having them get stuck. This means you should always make sure that you're placing water tasks like the mill next to your plantations, you've got your feed box and coolers near the center of your base, and you only have a storage box and pal box directly in the center. And another pathing tip here is that you need to really be careful when you're breeding big pals. If they get outside of your blue base circle, there's a chance that they'll just bug out and not breed. So make sure your breeding farms are placed far enough away from any boundary to make sure that that doesn't happen. They stay within the right zone and they do what you want them to do. Our next tip is going to be especially useful just for a quick reference to get familiar with some of these things, because there's a lot of passives in the game, but here are some of the most important ones for different needs. For your base working pals, Artisan gives plus 50% work speed, Work Slave gives plus 30% work speed, but it's not a golden passive, it also lowers attack, and Serious and Lucky also increase work speed. For your combat pals, Legend gives plus 20% attack and defense and plus 15% movement speed, Ferocious gives plus 20% attack, Musclehead gives plus 30% attack but lowers work speed by 50%, and Lucky gives plus 15% attack as well. For your mounts, Swift gives plus 30% move speed, Runner gives plus 20%, Legend gives plus 15%, and Nimble gives plus 10% movement speed. So the question is, where the hell do you find all of these, right? Let's move on. Next tip. Certain passives are only found through various methods in the wild, because you can find most of them out there, but you may, for example, not have actually seen a Lucky or Legend appearing very frequently. It turns out the Lucky passive is found on these sparkling Lucky pals, and Legend is only found from legendary endgame pals such as Palladius, Necromus, Frostallion, Frostallion Noct, and Jet Dragon. Now these fights are not easy, and you're gonna struggle with them if you are not strong. But this is a MrRoflWaffles tips video, so let me give you a quick little bonus tip to make this a teeny tiny bit easier. If you go into the server settings once again and up your damage to pals, damage dealt by the player, and pal capture rate, you'll have a significantly better chance in these fights and you'll be able to get those legends. Next tip. If you don't have the right amount of production, gold, or pals, it can be pretty difficult to get started with breeding in the first place. And breeding also requires a bunch of cake to make eggs, which requires milk and eggs and honey and flour and berries. So to get up and running here, you're going to want to make yourself a few wheat and berry plantations and use the mill to make flour. At your base, you're going to want multiple ranches, and if you give each ranch the following pals, they'll drop you a bunch of resources that you need for your cake while they're working at the ranch. So Bee Guard can be found here on the map. Give Bee Guard to one ranch. Then Chickpea can be found just about anywhere, and Mozzarina, which is also found just about here. For our next tip here, we've obviously just talked about the Artisan passive, right, which gives 50% work speed, and we've just talked about putting these pals to work in the ranch in order to get those cake resources. So can you breed them into Artisan for extra work speed to get more stuff? It turns out work speed doesn't actually increase their production at the ranch, or at least not nearly as much as this next trick does. pals. So what I recommend you do is you go into the server settings, once again, you turn up your pal appearance rate if your machine can handle it, and you go hunting to capture as many Mozzarinas and Chickapees as you can. Then sacrifice them for your chosen Mozzarina or Chickapee respectively at the pal essence container. And that's going to improve their grazing level to 2 once you get them all the way to 4 stars. And that will make a significant difference. So this is highly recommended. For a bonus tip here, if you built your base where I did, you can walk just outside and find a bee guard spawn just there. You can kill or capture them and then run back to base, immediately run back to where they spawned originally, and you can repeat this process to just get infinite honey super fast. Next tip, let's talk about best base pals. In my opinion, these are the best ones for working at your base. For planting and harvesting, and sometimes for transporting, I'd say Verdash, Lylene, Patalia, and Bronkerry are good picks. For watering, Yormantide, Azarobe, and Serpent are good choices. For kindling, Yormantide, Ignis, Suzaku, or Ragnarhawk are good choices. For cooling, I go with a Jolt Hog Crisp. Next tip. Maybe you're listening to that list of best base pals that I just worked through, and you're like, okay, well, hold your horses, Milo. I don't have the best pals ever, right? Then what do I do? Thankfully, this isn't the end of the world. And for example, I've got these 2 Ragnarhawks here, but I didn't actually capture these. Instead, I found huge scorching eggs by the volcano area and hatched them instead. And huge eggs are rare, but they are definitely very much possible to find. And these large eggs can yield great base workers as well. Next tip. My pals have been on a diet of baked berries for maybe too long, and I think it's easy to slip into this habit because they're super easy to make, but they also raise sanity by 1 each time they're eaten. This bonus isn't great, and it could be a lot better. So in order to finally grow up and start moving on from those berries, I had to make a tomato and lettuce farm, and this actually worked really well. With those, you can make a salad, and salads increase sanity by 11 for each use, which is a lot better than berries. Now then, next tip. Sometimes pals aren't working fast enough, but the good news is that you can change that by building a monitoring stand. Now, if you set it to super hard working, your pals are gonna be production machines, but it does come at a cost to sanity. And this is why we need to make those salads. So tomato and lettuce farm, make your salads, raise their sanity, set the stand to super hard working, and rake in the sweet dollar bills, baby. And for a sweet bonus tip, your pals are going to prioritize putting food items in your feed box. So whenever there are empty slots in there, they're going to transport your harvests into the box. To avoid this, you can put some cotton candy in the rightmost 5 slots and your salad on the left, and now they're going to prioritize putting your harvested food into your coolers instead. Next tip. If you hate managing your spoil timers, there are a few ways to never spoil your food again. First, use a fridge or cooler to increase the spoil timer. Next, hit the sort button in your inventory or your container's inventory, and that will reset the timers. Or third, leave your food in whatever cooking device you made it in. And lastly, you can also place cakes at the breeding boxes and they'll never spoil, even if they aren't being eaten by pals. Next tip. You're going to find that you may need to replace some pals at your base if you've made it an all-in-one production center and breeding farm like I've done. And this can be a little tricky to manage, admittedly, especially if you don't have the perfect pals. But the good news is you can increase your max pals at base to 20 in the server settings, and you can even throw down one from your party. And what's cool about the pal used from your party is that it won't lose any sanity while you're doing this. Now, speaking of moving pals to where they need to be, sometimes your pals are going to refuse to work at a breeding pen. So I tend to throw them as far back as possible, like shown here. It seems to work every time for me. Give it a try. Let me know if it works for you too. Next tip. Sometimes you'll be breeding 2 pals and you'll be thinking, damn, okay, these are some good passives that I'd really like to pass down, right? But without realizing, while your pal does have 2 really good passives, it may also have some bloat. Your pal could even be perfect with 4 golden passives, right? But unfortunately, the perfect pal may not be the best one to breed with. The pal with only 2 passives is the ideal parent, as they're likely to pass down 2 of their traits to their children. Next tip. Maybe you don't have the perfect parents with 2 gold passives you want to pass down. Like in my case here, for example, I wanted a parent to have Musclehead and Ferocious, but out of all my pals, none of them had those 2 together. So I took a Foxbarks and a Chickpea, right? So I'm not using crazy pals here. And each of these pals had just one of the traits, and then I bred them together, and boom, my egg resulted in a Musclehead Ferocious combo, and now I have the perfect parent. So sometimes it's about thinking up the food chain to go from one perfect trait to two, and then breeding those together in the future. And this brings me on to my next tips section, really, which is about breeding for traits, not for pals. Our first tip here is the fact that you've probably thought to yourself, how can I breed into the most endgame pals, right? And sure, you can breed a mediocre one with the right combination, but if you don't have the right passives, you're missing out on lots of power. So what I recommend instead is for you to breed your pals with the best traits first, and then worry about breeding into your endgame pals, rather than prioritizing the pal type initially. A Chickpea and a Lamball are all more likely to have the traits you want than a hard to capture endgame pal, and so you may as well use them as the seed, if you will, for those future breeding combinations that would be much more fiddly to create otherwise. For a bonus tip, literally any pal can be absolutely crazy strong in the game so long as it has decent passives, okay? So you don't need to get super stressed about getting the absolute best ones in the game. You can just have some fun with it. For a while, my most powerful pal was this little Cativer, and it smacked the hell out of most of the bosses in the game. So if mine can do it, yours can too. And if you want to see me do some myth busting, rewinding time, and capturing Zoe, and using that Cativer to beat endgame bosses, click the link on the screen right now.